everybody, it's Haley. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am so excited to film this video. I was requested a couple of months ago to do a video of recommendations for fantasy books with a happily ever after that are not going to make you cry. And that was tricky to piece together, and I did not expect that. I didn't think that prompt was going to be hard. I read that comment and I thought, yes, I'll get right on that. Super easy. And as I started to go through all of the books that I've read, I had a really hard time finding books that fit that prompt. And I think the hard thing was fantasy books have high stakes most of the time, right? Compared to like a contemporary romance or a just kind of general fiction or a horror or mystery. There's a lot of pieces to a fantasy that are just kind of necessary for the genre. High stakes is one of them. Like a lot of the times you've got fights between good and evil, and you've got battles and trials and curses and magic and all of these things that drive the stakes up in these books. And with that drives up your emotions, and usually casualties happen, right? Like there's this kind of tug in fantasy books on our emotions because there's so much to it. And I realized when I made this list that it wasn't going to be as easy as I thought it was, which was actually really fun. And I really enjoyed putting this list together for you guys. But that does mean I really had to work at this list. So all of the books in here are happily ever after endings, guaranteed, and most likely not going to make you cry. Now, I know that's subjective because we all have different things that we cry about. Some of these may make you happy cry. Some of these may make you sad cry. Can't really guarantee that, but I'm going to try my best to recommend ones that will most likely not make you too emotional unless it's happy. And I hope you enjoy at least one of these books if you try reading them. Also, side note, you may hear my dogs walking around my house. They are like pacing around while I'm filming because of course they have to do that every time I start to film. So just if you hear them walking around, they're around doing their thing. So yeah, let's dive right in. Okay, book number 1 is Entwined by Heather Dixon. And I read this book so long ago, over 10 years ago when I was in high school. And so I wanted to recommend this book because it is a great book if you do not want to get too emotional in your fantasy, but you want to have all of the characters that you can still love and feel connected to. This is a book about 12 sisters, and it's actually a play on an old fairy tale or an old story. I think it's called like 12 Dancing Sisters or something like that. It really is, the title matches what the book is about. And basically these 12 sisters lose their mother. She dies very early on in the book. And that doesn't really spoil anything in here, but they all love to dance. And they've basically been forbidden to dance. They're not allowed to do it, but they sneak off in the night and they go to this other kind of like realm, other kingdom where they're able to dance. But the caveat is they cannot let anybody else know that they are going to this other place where this keeper lives to dance. And there is so much character development in this book. It's really interesting to watch 12 sisters all have pieces in the story. And I've seen a lot of people review this book and talk about how impressed they were with this piece, and I was too. How like with 12 sisters, you think, okay, it's going to focus on a couple, and it does. There's the 3 main sisters that are the 3 oldest, and they definitely are the forefront of the story, but you will get some piece of every single sister, which I think is great. And the relationship between the sisters, the family aspect is great in this book, but you also have that like romance piece. It is a YA fantasy romance, so nothing too crazy. But again, with the 3 oldest sisters, you really do see that romance piece come into play as well. So just so much character development, and definitely a character-driven book. really interesting, and it wraps up with a happily ever after. So highly recommend this book. I love books that are based on fairy tales or like a spin-off of a common story. I know that the story this is based on is not super common, but definitely one that I would recommend. And it is a standalone, so that also is a nice piece because you're not committing to this huge series when reading it. Okay, next up, I'm really excited to share about the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. And with this, I would also recommend the duology with the Stolen Heir and I think it's Prisoner's Throne, the spin-off duology from this world. Highly recommend both by Holly Black. You've probably heard The Cruel Prince mentioned if you're on Book Talk or Bookstagram or BookTube, and there's a reason why. These books are so interesting and so enjoyable to read. They're very short, very quick YA fantasy romance, but with some very unique pieces. I love the relationship dynamic between the male and female main characters in this book. Jude and Carden and June are their names. They are so funny. Their dynamic is so different from anyone else. You have Jude, who is this amazingly strong, assertive, adventurous woman. And then you have Carden, who is this more kind of soft, subdued, kind of grumpy, broody, but overall a lot more soft of a male. And it's interesting because a lot of the times in fantasy books, I feel like you get those very kind of traditional, typical roles of the man being the, I'm gonna go save the day, and then the girl who's like the damsel in distress. And that is not the case in this book. You see both Carden and Jude each saving each other in their own way, and very much so not sticking to the typical relationship dynamic. And I really enjoyed that. It's so interesting to see something like that. The plot is great. It's very much so broken up into like a beginning, middle, end. So I would highly recommend reading all 3 books. There are some pieces where it gets a little bit emotional, but I would say overall, if you read till the 3rd book, it is a guaranteed happily ever after. The book overall is going to make you giddy and happy more than anything, even in the parts where these two are, they're enemies to lovers, don't get me wrong. They do not like each other throughout this whole thing, but you kind of read between the lines and see everything blooming. And overall, it is definitely a book I would recommend for this video, a book series, because it's definitely got that fantasy, easy to read, nothing too high stakes, but a little bit higher stakes than some of the other books I'm going to recommend. And I would definitely say that if you're looking for a series, this would be the one to go with. That being said, I'm going to move into another standalone, and this one is 1,000 Heartbeats by Kiera Cass. And kind of like the Holly Black books, I would recommend Kiera Cass for this prompt in general. She writes several standalones, also some series, and she does a lot of that kind of happily ever after. She wraps it all up in a very pretty bow, and 1,000 Heartbeats is one example of that. She also has another standalone called The Siren, which I would also recommend if you like this book. She has the Selection series, and she's written several other books. She does such a good job of building a world, giving you just enough to keep you entertained, but keeping it light and easy the whole time. I felt that way a lot in this book. You've got a girl who is raised in a kingdom thinking everything's great, right? She's a royal, she's the princess. She thinks her family's awesome. And then come to find out through the kind of prince, if you will, of the rebel group, that her family is not this amazing royal savior that they think they are, and that their spot on the throne is not as warranted as she thinks it is. And it's just a very interesting book. Highly recommend. It's a standalone. It's a little bit on the longer side, but you definitely can read it very easily. Very, very enjoyable. Happily ever after. And again, there's really nothing in this book that's going to make you too emotional. So definitely fits for this prompt. Next up is another book that when I read it, like A Thousand Heartbeats, I read that one with a very open mind, very much so, kind of like no expectations, just we're gonna see how this goes. This book was a lot like that. I had no context going into it and I devoured it. This is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and I absolutely loved this book. If you follow me on my Bookstagram, which is down below, I even made a whole post talking about this. I loved this book. It was so good. It is very short. It's a standalone. I mean, super quick. But one thing I love about this book also is that it is just, it's so easy to read, but lots of world building in this small of a book. There is a girl where her name's Isabel, right? I think it's Isabel. Yeah, Isabel. And basically the Fae in this book, this is so interesting to me. The Fae in this book do not have really the powers like they typically do in fantasy books. The humans have this thing called craft, which is basically the arts, creativity, anything like that humans are capable of, and the Fae are not. They can basically use a little bit of magic to like glamour things to make it look nice, but to actually create like art or crafts, things like that, cooking, music, anything like that, it has to come from humans, which I think is so interesting, because when I think of fairies, and I think when most of us think of fae or magic or kingdoms or things like that, we think they're the ones with all the cool stuff. And in this book, they are like in awe of the humans. So this girl, Isabel, basically she has this gift where she can paint you to showcase the things that you like most about yourself, or the emotions you want to exude, the characteristics you want to exude. And she's famous with the Fae for this. So a prince, one of the Fae princes, he comes and wants his portrait painted, and she paints him in a way showcasing an emotion, and it says it on the back, so I won't give too much away, but she showcases him with sorrow. And that is just like not the emotion he wants to exude, right? You want to be happy, you want to be powerful, all of these things, not sad, not sorrowful. And so he is basically super angry because the portrait is kind of mocked where he lives in his kingdom. And so he comes to take her prisoner to ultimately like kill her. Obviously does not kill her, but they end up going on this kind of adventure, or at least I don't want to call it, because it really has no purpose other than he's trying to take her to the kingdom, but that doesn't end up happening. So it's kind of like a derailed capturing, and it's really a good book. I read it in one sitting on one of the days I was sick in May. So good, highly recommend. Happily ever after ending, and very much so. Again, there's one part at the very end which it's happily ever after, so if you know that going in, this part probably won't make you cry, but most all of this book is definitely made to just make you feel kind of giddy. Great book, highly recommend. And with that being said, the next book is just another great recommendation. All of these books, something about reading happily ever after, easy, light fantasies, they just make you happy, and I love that. So this was a pleasant surprise. This is a part of a series, and they are interconnected standalones. This is A Taste of Poison by Tsonya Odette, and this is a part of the Entangled with Fae series. And if you look up any of the books in this series, the basics stay the same, which is that they are retellings of fairy tales, fantasy retellings. This is a Snow White, which you could probably tell from the cover. And then there is like I think there's a Sleeping, or not a Sleeping Beauty, or no, there is a Sleeping Beauty. And then there's a Snow White, there is a Beauty and the Beast, and I can't remember the other ones, but it is an ongoing, interconnected, standalone series. You could totally read each of these by themselves. You can read them in any order. I would recommend, just because as you read on, they explain the world a little bit less and less, like a little bit more is assumed. I would probably just start from the beginning, but this is, I think, the third or fourth book in it, and I really loved this one. It is so fun. I don't really ever see Snow White retellings, so that kind of captured my interest. And they're very, very interesting books because there's a lot of pieces to them that are just completely not related to the retelling, because there's fae involved, which of course most fairy tales don't have like fae in the way that these are used. There's magical powers involved. Just very, very interesting. This Snow White one is where a girl, Astrid Snow, her father dies and everybody blames it on her. So that's kind of the Snow White piece, right? Is her father dies, the stepmother blames her, and she is basically like, I want her dead because she killed my husband. So they think. So she is on the run, and she has this magic where anything that somebody sees in themselves is reflected back to her, or she reflects out to them. So nobody knows what she really looks like. She looks different to everybody because of their perception when they see her. And so this huntsman is sent after her to kill her or bring her back to the stepmother. And he realizes, she tries to convince him that she didn't kill the king, her father. And basically they have to go on this quest to figure out like who actually did it. Really good book, really, really interesting premise. And again, nothing crazy in this one, emotions wise, just a really good kind of action-packed time and a happily ever after ending where even the stepmother, this is not really a spoiler, but I will say even by the end of it, your opinions of the stepmother will shift and change. Your opinions of every character will shift and change in this book. But what is really cool is the way that nothing is quite as it seems at the beginning, the middle, and then by the time you get to the end, you're like, what? I loved that. There were some predictable pieces, but overall, really interesting. This one, all of the other books I've mentioned up until this point are kind of in that YA fantasy romance category for the most part. This is a little bit more adult. There's a little bit more steam in this book than in the other ones I've mentioned so far. That being said, not anything crazy, but I just thought I'd mention it in case that is a factor for you. Last book I'm going to talk about was a physical copy. Then I'm going to talk about some books that were on my Kindle that I really enjoyed. This book I have not actually finished yet. I just started it, but I wanted to throw it in because it definitely is going to fit in with the prompt. I have read a teeny spoiler of the ending just to double check that it is in fact a happily ever after. It is Dragon Fruit by Micaiah Lucier, and it is a very fun, I mean, I'm enjoying it. I just started it. Basically, there is a girl where there are these things called sea dragons, and they are kind of like a special creature on this island. It is an islander story, island setting, all of that, which I think is very fun, very cool. It definitely gave me like Moana feels. I loved it. But basically, I'll just kind of read through this piece since I can't give you the best description of it. But Hanalei of Tamarind is the cherished daughter of an old island family, but when her father steals a sea dragon egg meant for an ailing princess, she is forced into a life of exile. And then in the years that follow, Hanalei finds solace in studying the majestic sea dragons that roam the Namanomi, I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced, Namanomi Sea. That's where this book jumps in, by the way. She's already kind of in that when it jumps in, until one day an encounter with a female dragon offers her what she desires most, a chance to return home and right a terrible wrong. And then there is a male main character, Sam. He is the last remaining prince of Tamarind, but he can never inherit the throne because it's a matriarchal society, which we love how it's just interesting, different. A lot of these books have little different pieces. There isn't a king in the society that's super important. It's the matriarchy. And so with his mother ill and his grandmother nearing the end of her reign, he is left to two choices: to marry or find a cure for the sickness that plagued his mother for 10 long years. When a childhood companion returns from exile, wonder who that is, she brings with her something he has not felt in a very long time: hope. So this is one of those books where, from just even the very beginning where I'm at till what I've heard from the end, very happily ever after, fantasy elements, adventure elements, just enjoyable, good times. So recommending, even though I haven't finished, still recommending this one. Now let's dive in and talk about some books that I read on my Kindle that I loved. Okay, first book I want to talk about that I read on my Kindle was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I loved this book. This book took me by surprise. It is a Regency Fae book. First in its series, which is all going to be interconnected standalones, I'm pretty sure. I haven't read the second two that are out, but I think they're interconnected. So in this one, there is a girl who, basically when she's young, a Fae guy, a fairy lord, steals half of her soul. Her mother actually makes this deal where she's going to give her firstborn daughter away. But in the process, she gets saved by her sister, and in that, the Lord only gets half of her soul. So obviously missing half your soul kind of impacts who you are as a person. So she misses some of the things that are just common human feelings, right? She has this very interesting personality. She can't relate to all emotions. She doesn't really feel extreme emotions. Extreme joy, extreme sadness, extreme anger. Like, she just kind of is this narrowed scope of emotions due to the fact that she only has half of a soul. And in this Regency era, which that is such a fun piece, it's like Bridgerton meets Fae. So fun. In this era, she's trying to find a husband, right? This is the Regency piece. It's kind of like Regency England setting. She's trying to find a husband. And of course, because of her personality being the way that it is and her just lack of kind of social cue reading, she has a hard time with that. Enter Lord Sorcier, who is the kind of magician of the court, and he totes this line where, like, in society, magic is not supposed to really be a thing. That's like for the Fae, and they don't really commingle with the people. And he kind of totes this line as the court magician, but he is also trying to figure out how to solve this plague. The bunch of children are like basically getting put into like these comas and dying, and they're wondering what's going on. Well, she and the magician and some of their friends all get roped into trying to figure out what is going on with all of these children. Why are they getting sick? What's going on? And of course, it leads back to the Fae. So super interesting book. I highly recommend it. Definitely in like my top books of the year. It was so good. And it's just really interesting. The plot is really heavy in this book, as well as the characters. And I love how involved the side characters are in this story. You get definitely glimpses of everybody. And I love that. There's his family, not his family, sorry, his friend's family, which will make more sense if you read it. But basically there is a couple of friends involved on her side and his side, and you get all of their characters involved, and you end up having an opinion about everybody by the end of it. Like, you're not neutral on anybody in the best way. It is so fun. Definitely happily ever after, enjoyable. There are some interesting topics, like of course the plague with like the children getting sick. It's not anything too serious, so like nothing super high stakes, so it shouldn't be too emotional, but that is just kind of a little bit of a heads up. But overall, very, very enjoyable, happy, fun book, and I highly recommend it. Okay, next up is a book that I'm really excited to share as well, which is Frost and Nectar. And this is a series. It's short, but it's kind of fun. It is basically like Faye and The Bachelor put together. There's a girl, she gets out of a bad relationship, and this is like in the modern contemporary world. And basically the Fae live in this other land, but they can get to the human world, and the Fae Prince does. And he basically puts on this like bachelor competition with like super high stakes to find his next wife. And he figures whoever wins this competition, I will have all these girls there, I will marry whoever wins. And basically he makes a deal with the girl who is just like having the worst go of things in life. He's like, hey, try out for the competition, and if you win, I will pay you money. Because he does not like most of the girls in the competition. He does not want them to win. And so he thinks like, okay, I will put you in, you actually have to try to win, and then like we can maybe get engaged or something, and I don't really have to put a lot of effort into this. I don't even really have to like you, but I'll pay you a bunch of money. And the girl's like, my life sucks, so why wouldn't I do that? And so of course, for the money, she agrees to be in the competition. And the competition has little parts. I will give a heads up, there are some little kind of gory parts of the competition. I know I said like it's Bachelor meets Fae and it sounds all light, but the competition's pretty serious between the girls. Like they take it seriously, and it's like to the death at points. But overall, it is a happily ever after. It is a fantasy. It has very unique elements that I think are very enjoyable. I would say it's a little bit more on the adult side, again, just due to kind of the degree of action and romance and things like that. But it was very enjoyable, very interesting. Don't take it too serious, but if you're in it just for like a good fun time, I would recommend it for this. Overall, had a good time. And you just kind of got to go into it, I think, with not too high of expectations. Some of these books, like Half a Soul, I think you can go into it with a very different set of expectations than a book like, or a series like Frost and Nectar. So just kind of go into it with that in mind, but it definitely still fits the theme, the prompt. Okay, last book for the video is a book that I haven't actually read, but it's on my TBR, and I've heard such good things about it. It is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. And I want to read this. It sounds so interesting. Basically, a girl who is the oldest of three sisters gets cursed by a witch who does not, she makes her upset. She curses her to be an old woman unless she can break the curse. And she has to do that in the Howl's Moving Castle. And I've heard some very interesting things about this book, but it sounds so like fun, fantastical. I've heard it has a happily ever after, and it does not sound overly emotional from what I've also heard. Now, I haven't read this book, so this is kind of one of those hearsay books. Like it could absolutely not be fitting to this prompt, but I will say I've read a lot of reviews, I've read a lot of thoughts, and it does seem like it fits. So I thought I would throw it in just because since it is very popular and since it has a very like positive reception from most people, it seems worth the mention. So I wanted to toss that in. Definitely feel free to check it out. I am hoping to get around to reading it soon. So maybe once I do, I'll confirm or deny it in a reading wrap up if it fits this prompt, but I'm hoping it does. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Talking about these books, I know I mentioned before, they always make me feel happy. There's something about a light, happy, easy book where there is a fantasy aspect, but it's not too dark or dangerous or anything like that, that just makes you happy. I don't know if it's like the fairy tale feeling of being a kid or what, but putting together this video was so enjoyable. I got to read some books that I hadn't read before for it, and I got to think back on books I previously read that gave me that feeling. So I hope if you are able to read any of these books that you enjoy that feeling as well, and hopefully find one or two that you will enjoy and like. If you would like to see more videos like this, or you have more ideas for videos, let me know down below in the comments, and I will definitely get around to filming those. Even if it takes me a month or two to compile a list, I promise I will get to them. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Have an awesome day, week, whatever have you. Enjoy. See you in the next one.